All right. So you're ready to dive into this deep dive? We're really getting into some thought-provoking stuff today, talking about consciousness and perception.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff.
Yeah, this source, it talks about escaping the mind trap, right? And I think, most of us can probably relate to that feeling of being like stuck in our own heads sometimes.
Absolutely.
So we're going to unpack all of that today.
What we have here is a really interesting perspective. This source, it suggests that while our minds are powerful, they're incredible tools for navigating the world.
Right.
They can also create a kind of false reality.
Okay, whoa, false reality. That sounds kind of intense. What do they actually mean by that?
So picture this. You're looking at a tree, right? Instead of just experiencing that tree, like the texture of the bark, the rustling of the leaves, our minds, they can't help but jump in with all these labels and judgments.
So I'm thinking, oh, that's a tall tree. Or that tree could use a trim.
Exactly.
Instead of just like actually seeing it.
Right. And according to this source, all that mental chatter, it kind of traps us in a world of our own making. It prevents us from fully connecting with, like, the present moment.
So it's like we're not really experiencing life directly. We're experiencing it through this filter of our own thoughts.
Precisely. And the source calls this the mind trap.
The mind trap, okay.
This idea that our thoughts, as useful as they are, they can really limit our experience, even lead to unnecessary suffering.
Okay, yeah, I'm starting to get a sense of this mind trap idea. But, I mean, isn't that just how our brains work? Like, don't we need language, categories, and all that to make sense of the world?
Of course. And this source isn't saying that thinking is inherently bad, right?
Right.
It's more about recognizing that our thoughts aren't the ultimate reality.
Okay.
They're mental constructs, tools, and like any tool, they can be helpful or, well, not so helpful depending on how we use them.
So our thoughts, they can sometimes trap us in like a limited view of reality or even like a distorted view. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. And this mind trap can show up in so many ways, from like anxiety and worry to those limiting beliefs that we've all had that hold us back from going after what we want.
Totally. Yeah, like when you're stressing about something and your mind just keeps replaying all the worst case scenarios over and over again.
Right. And it's not just about anxiety. This source is saying this mind trap can also, keep us stuck in these negative patterns.
Yeah.
Prevent us from really reaching our full potential.
Okay, so let's say like we're buying into this whole mind trap idea. How do we actually break free? Because the source talks about this idea of going outside of the mind, which sounds a little, well, it sounds kind of abstract to me.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But the source, it does offer some practical techniques as well.
Okay, good.
And one of the key ones is practicing what it calls label-free awareness.
Label-free awareness. Okay, what is that?
Essentially, it's about observing our experience, our thoughts, our emotions, what's happening around us, without immediately like slapping labels on everything.
Interesting. So instead of thinking, oh, I'm so stressed right now, it's more like, my chest feels kind of tight. Interesting.
Exactly. Yeah.
That almost seems too easy.
It does. It does.
But I see what they're getting at.
It's about recognizing that the feeling itself, like, it's neutral. Right.
Okay.
It's our mind that comes in and says, like, this is bad or this is scary.
Right.
And then it creates a whole story around it.
Yeah.
And that just amplifies the feeling, makes it seem way bigger and scarier than it actually is.
Wow. Yeah, that's actually a really helpful distinction. Because it's like the feeling itself might just last for a few seconds, but then our minds can really latch onto it and turn it into this whole big thing that can last for like hours, days.
Absolutely. The source even argues that when we stop resisting those emotions, when we stop judging them, they actually tend to dissipate more quickly.
Okay, now that's a bold claim. So you're saying, like, if I just sit with my anxiety and just observe it, it might actually go away faster than if I tried to, like, fight it or distract myself from it.
That's exactly what the source is suggesting, yeah.
Interesting.
And, I mean, it's not always easy, right? Like, our natural instinct is often to, like, run away from those uncomfortable feelings.
Oh, for sure.
But this source, it's arguing that real freedom, it comes from facing our inner experience with a sense of, like, courage, curiosity, and most importantly, without judgment.
I gotta admit, this is all starting to sound a bit like meditation.
It is, right? It touches on some key principles of, mindfulness and meditation.
Yeah.
But what I find really unique about this source is, like, it really emphasizes how these practices can be used in everyday life.
Okay, so it's not just about, like, sitting on a cushion, chanting Om. It's about like integrating these principles of awareness into our daily routines, our interactions.
Exactly.
Like how we move through the world.
Yeah, and the source suggests that even like these small moments of label-free awareness throughout the day,
Yeah.
they can really have a big impact on our well-being.
So like what would be an example of a small moment like that?
It could be anything from like really paying attention to the taste of your coffee in the morning
Okay.
to like as you're walking, noticing the sensation of your feet on the ground.
Right.
It's about bringing that same quality of awareness to all those everyday experiences that, we often just rush through on autopilot.
Right, right. Just like bringing a little more presence to those everyday moments. I like that. I like that idea. It feels much more doable than trying to be like perfectly mindful all the time,
Right.
But the source also gets into some pretty, I don't know, mystical territory, talking about heaven and hell and like being one with everything.
Yeah.
And that feels like a pretty big leap from just like paying attention to my coffee.
It does. It does. But I think it's important to remember that this source is using these terms, metaphorically, to kind of highlight this contrast between these two really different ways of being.
Okay, so we're not talking about like literal heaven and hell here.
No, not in the traditional sense. Remember, this source comes from a perspective that emphasizes like personal experience and subjective reality.
Right.
So when they talk about hell, what they're really getting at is this state of being, like trapped in our own minds. Those negative thought patterns, the anxieties, the judgments.
Yeah.
That feeling of just being like overwhelmed by our thoughts, disconnected from ourselves and from the present moment.
So like our own personal hell that we're creating in our minds.
Exactly. And on the other hand, when they talk about heaven, they're using that to represent this state of peace, clarity, connection.
Right.
That can emerge when we start to step out of that mind trap, right?
Okay.
It's that feeling of being fully present, open to experience, at ease with ourselves and the world around us.
So it's less about like a physical place and more about just like a state of mind. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. And what this source is saying is that this heavenly state, it's not something that like we need to go searching for somewhere else, right?
Right.
It's already here. It's present within us,
Okay.
It's just hidden beneath all those layers of like mental chatter and conditioning.
Okay, I'm starting to understand the analogy here. But the source also talks about this idea of becoming one with everything, which, I mean, that's definitely getting into some pretty mystical territory. What do you make of that?
It is. And, it's something that like a lot of spiritual traditions have explored over, centuries and millennia even.
Right.
But I think in this context, what this source is pointing to is this idea that our sense of separation, from ourselves, from each other, from the world around us, it's mostly an illusion.
Okay.
It's something that our minds create.
So when we quiet the mind and like tap into that state of pure awareness, we start to experience this sense of interconnectedness with everything.
Exactly. And it's not to say that like our individual identities completely disappear or anything like that.
Right.
But we might start to perceive this interconnected nature of all things a little more clearly.
Yeah.
And in that realization, the source argues, we can find, a deeper sense of peace, of purpose, of belonging.
Wow. Okay. That's a pretty profound idea. But how do we know? How do we know if we're actually experiencing this oneness or if it's just, wishful thinking?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Right.
And ultimately, it really is up to each of us to like explore these ideas for ourselves.
Yeah.
See what resonates with our own experience.
Right.
Because, this source, it doesn't give us any definitive answers or proofs.
Of course.
It's really just an invitation, to question our assumptions, to explore the nature of our own minds.
And maybe that's the point, right? It's about that journey of self-discovery and expanding our awareness rather than trying to like arrive at some fixed destination.
This has been a really thought-provoking deep dive, I think.
It has.
We've covered a lot, from this idea of the mind trap and its effects to like, practical techniques for cultivating awareness, even some pretty mystical concepts.
Yeah, I went there.
We did. But that's
Yeah.
what we do here, That's what these deep dives are all about. So until next time, keep those minds open and we'll catch you on the next one.